Edward here from everviewer.com. I have part two of my fascinating interview with architect, engineer, artist Kevin Carpenter. This is a really in-depth, we go deep into the second half here as Kevin talks about his understanding of designing architecture to have an effect on people. It is designed for that and to have specific types of effects on people, and it's fascinating because as he's explaining this to me, my mind is I'm trying to comprehend his comprehension of what he's saying, and I ask him if resources weren't an issue. He could design and build anything he wanted. What effect would he want to stimulate in human beings? And his response was a state of awe, a state of awness. And when he said that, the magnitude of it hit me, of what he was saying, and the sincerity of it. When a human being is stimulated into a state of awe, a state of awness, what experience is that? That is when you take someone into another realm. You're stimulating a human brain into another realm of existence, a state of awness. He, I believe, will design and build architectures and things that will create this state in human beings. When I asked him what that was, his mind went into a state that was really interesting to me. Of these things are not created yet, and it was like. What they are, he did not have access to them yet. It was fascinating. It was fascinating to watch. Kevin is a brilliant human being, brilliant mind. I can't say enough about it. Experiencing and exploring his mind and his comprehension of these things was absolutely fascinating to me, and I can't wait to. I hope to have the opportunity to sit with him and interview him again and continue to explore these things. We talk about that affect of architecture and how modern architecture in the past 50 years has really had a negative impact on the human experience. And he has a complete understanding of this and has an internal drive to change that, and we talk about what he knows about this coming Renaissance time. It is upon us. There's something happening. There's a lot going on, and I truly believe that Kevin has a part in that, has a role in that, and a key role in that, in this wave that I believe we will experience in our lifetime. Where this creative potential is hitting our planet and our consciousness, and people like Kevin will utilize that creative potential and design and build things with it that will have an affect on human beings, including the affect that he is after, which is a state of awness. So intense. That's it for me. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let you get right into the second half of this interview. And I want to thank Kevin and Carter so much for allowing me into their home, and enjoy the second half of this interview.
Right. One of the things that I've been recently learning about is the doctrine of affect, which they use in music. And like Bach and stuff like that, where you design things intentionally to create an emotional affect.
Yeah.
And there are formulas for these type of things, as there are formulas in architecture. that if you embed certain, like golden ratio principles or sacred geometry or different, different harmonic ratios and different numbers, if you embed that into art, it is timeless. One,
Right.
this stuff resonates for everyone in mass on some level, and it is forever doing that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the art that I really, really love is stuff that on the surface it just looks like a piece of art, but then you can't tell what it is about it that makes it so good until you start analyzing it from sort of the affect side of things. Like, well, wow, they embedded a lot of geometry into those things, and this is intentional. And you can see this a lot with the Renaissance masters. Anyone who's a master of that sort of genre, is I look at a painting and every time a sword is held up, why is it always at 72 degrees? Yeah. Anytime someone's holding a stake or a sword or anything, it's always at a certain degree.
Everything.
Every single time.
Yeah.
And then like the way perspective works and the way a subject is approached, you see that you can overlay geometry over all of these paintings and understand that, oh, there's a reason this is so good. It's designed to be good.
Right.
It's not just designed to be a scene.
Right.
It's designed to actually have an affect. And, architecture is very much this way, which is why I resonate so powerfully with that type of art, mathematical art and architecture, because if it's done well, it really has, it brings out a response in you.
And is it with the art that you do, is there a certain type of response? Let's say if you could create exactly what you want to create, you didn't have to deal with anybody's funds or anything like that, or what anybody is agreeing, exactly what you wanted, what is the effect that you would be looking to stimulate from people who observe your creation?
Awe.
Describe. Tell me about that.
Might have to edit this part. I'm thinking. Trying to think of a good example. You stumped me.
When you say you would want to have an effect on people, and you would want people to be stimulated into a state of awness or wonderment.
I think I finally have a good response. So one of the reasons I've noticed throughout my life that, especially with school, that there was a time period in most of elementary school, I remember being in really old buildings, like turn of the century, old school, massive brick buildings. And so a large part of elementary school was spent being in these really fantastic buildings, and you would be learning. And lots of windows, huge windows, open spaces, that great smell, hand-carved banisters, and, old school buildings. And then there was a period in junior high and high school where I was subjected to, the 1950s and 60s and 70s aesthetic.
Very square.
Where it almost seemed like it was intentionally designed to make learning as difficult as possible.
Yeah.
And you would dread walking into these spaces, not because you didn't like school, but you just dreaded being in that building.
Yes.
And so immediately after leaving high school, I went to college on an exceptionally beautiful campus that was, again, built in 1918, had all of these fantastic buildings,
So you were like, oh, this
yeah,
is
and
learning,
I made that connection again of, wow, it's so much easier to think clearly, to learn, to open yourself up to new ideas, to be in the headspace, to be receptive to learning on all levels. So much of it is tied to just being in this environment. Like when I'm in an environment that's really beautiful and has these great old buildings,
you're inspired.
that, you know, they intentionally made them out of certain materials. There are a certain percentage of them that are handcrafted.
Yeah.
Like woodworkers really did build these things. They weren't made, you know, out of templates.
Right.
And I have always made that connection with architecture that, wow, as a civilization, the worse we start designing buildings, it makes sense to me why people can't think clearly.
Right.
This is also the case with, once I got into the corporate world, I realized that the building had a lot to do with my performance and my productivity.
Yeah.
I've worked in some places that were hell on earth, not because the job was bad, it's because the building was bad.
Right.
The lighting was bad, the carpet was bad, the paint choices were bad.
And your reaction to it limited your capability.
It really did. There was one time when I was in college, actually, I co-opted at a Japanese company in Dallas, and they had, I mean, this place was designed from the ground up by a feng shui master.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, you know, going to work every day, and you could tell the way they had things laid out, the flow, the energetic flow, the way the light was, the way the windows were placed, the colors they picked, everything added to productivity and clear thinking. And then immediately after that went back to a different environment where you're in a cube farm, and it is just oppressive and awful. And was watching, you know, most of the people around me not really getting any work done, myself included. It's like, how can you work in this space? And so from those experiences, I've just been reaffirming over and over and over again how important it is that in order to have a functioning civilization where people can think clearly, you really have to go back to the humanist Renaissance principles where all of this stuff matters. The design of buildings, the design of products, the design of art, it really does have a direct impact on how you behave and act and think.
Yeah.
And so if I was to sum up what I am trying to do as an artist at the macro level, it is that. I'm trying to get back to a lot of those Renaissance ideals and just keep them alive, reinforce them in today's society. That, you know, art isn't just something that looks good, it's serving a purpose in your home, in your office. It's serving a purpose to help you get through your day, keep you in the right mindset, all of that.
I got a question for you, because everything you've said is so fascinating to me. I got a million questions.
Okay.
It seems to me that your mind space is like very not constricted to time, meaning it's Renaissance, it's temples, you can see this kind of stream of way of thinking that goes back to the dawn of civilization. My question for you is, do you feel you were born in the right time?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. On the no side, I definitely resonate more with sort of that Gothic cathedral building period, and also some of the ancient temple periods, where clearly there was no differentiation between religion and science. Like science was religion, and so everything you were building or constructing or designing, you were doing it for a spiritual reason.
Right.
So I have always loved that idea, because I think it's true that you first have to come up with a philosophical idea and reinforce it in your building. And those periods of time have, I feel like I belong there. Like I could have fit right in with the Gothic cathedral builders. But I also feel like in some ways we're getting back there with a futuristic aesthetic, where sometimes you'll see like the movie Tomorrowland, or stuff that Carter was talking about in Brasilia, I guess his name was Oscar Niemeyer. That there is a way of designing things that look super fresh and futuristic, but they're actually using these old principles from...
Okay.
And it's one of the reasons why some of this futuristic architecture, some of it just looks like they weren't trying very hard. Others look like fantastically beautiful. So I do think there is a future Renaissance temple building phase that will happen, probably in our lifetime, if we don't destroy ourselves first. But it seems like there will be a subset of people that maybe it will be another Renaissance where just artists from all around the world come back together again to design some fantastic city of the future that is using all those principles from the past.
Do you feel that is happening?
I think it is happening very slowly and in little pockets that are still, by design, remaining quiet about it.
Well, let me ask you this, because you have a huge body of work that you've done. Yeah. But on that line of that last question, do you feel frustrated or disappointed that you're born in this time and not at, or you
Yes.
feel like you're in?
Well, one thing that is very sad and I guess a little bit disturbing is how much of our architecture and just general aesthetic in this country looks like Soviet era
Gulag
art and architecture.
If your apartment looks like a prison, you feel like a prisoner in it.
Yes, exactly. I went to Czechoslovakia one time and drove through Eastern Europe by car, and this was the one thing that I noticed was, this, like, it's no wonder this was so oppressive, because the art and the architecture and the layout of everything,
yeah.
It's like that in itself just, it's oppressive.
Yeah.
And so I see that, our tendency in America is, if it's older than 30 or 40 years, just tear it down. Yeah. There's nothing historic. There's no monumental architecture construction, and the art is just getting less and less beautiful, less and less inspiring. It's just this grotesque, see how vulgar and grotesque you can be.
Yeah.
And this has been going on for probably 60 years. This, with the rise of the modernism movement and the Jackson Pollocks of the world, it's just like, it's art, but it's not doing anything for humanity. It's not propelling us to, like the old, the old constructions were meant to inspire and create awe.
Right.
And so kind of getting back to that thing about awe.
Yeah.
Is, I did find a good sort of metaphor, is if you go into a cathedral or a really great church and listen to a sermon, it really is awesome hearing the organ and all of it. And then try to go into a strip mall shopping church. And back in the day, you know,
you can't wait to get out of
my
it.
parents used to do this sometimes. We would go to these different strip mall churches, and you walk in and like there's nothing inspiring at all about being in this space, and yet you're trying to talk about the most inspiring thing ever. It's like there's no...
Yeah.
Like, I think they should just tear all of the strip malls down and build some really good stuff, because it definitely translates more into, you know, that feeling of awe and wonder that comes across.
Let me ask you, because what you're saying is stimulating a lot more questions for me. Because the way it looks to me is we go through these creative and destructive cycles.
Yep.
And it seems like we're in a destructive cycle. And that's probably why everything looks so uninspiring.
Mm-hmm.
But do you feel we're like about on that...
I do.
On that turn?
I do.
And that inspiration is starting to come back in, a renaissance is starting to stimulate the mind, or maybe the creative aperture is starting to open, and like you were saying, in that twilight mind, when it's just like boom, the universe is flowing through your mind. Do you feel we're moving we're into that?
I do.
The next phase, and did you feel that's why you're here now?
Partially, yeah.
It seems like because when I'm talking to you and spending time with you and I'm looking at your art, I see a very timeless mind, and it goes back to times when architecture, what architecture really is, and why it was ever even brought into the human experience to stimulate and inspire humans. And it seems like you're at the age where we're going into that portion of it now, where your work where you're at the age to bring it, to be a part of it, and to create structures that will inspire awe in people. I can definitely see that in your soul, that what you want to do is create things that have a response in humans of, we experience awe. We don't, not just death and destruction, but we have the capacity for awe. And you know how to stimulate that in people, and it's in design. And that is amazing to me. I have had the most... I'm still trying to wrap my head around the immensity of the way you think, but I'm so thankful that you let me into your home, into your studio, into your space, where your mind is, where you let your mind free and create these things.
So the other great part about not watching television and growing up in that environment where you have encyclopedias and libraries and books is that I am an avid reader of history. And so this is one of those things that anyone who reads a lot of history realizes that all of this is cyclical.
Repeats.
Everything is cyclical. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up. And then you start to see the patterns, and there are patterns, and they happen in regular intervals, and these patterns happen all the time. And I've always loved the Trinity idea. Like, a lot of my work actually does use trinities because it's such a very powerful concept. And I'm not talking about the Christian version, I'm talking more about the Hindu version, where there's like God, or whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, the thing consists of three parts. It's a creator God, a preserver God, and a destroyer God. All three of them make one thing. So they don't exist outside of each other. It's one thing. So there are periods of creation, and then there are periods where nothing happens and you're just preserving what you created. And then there are periods where you just have to destroy it all to start it over again.
Start again.
Because in order for civilization and humanity, in order for all evolution to take place, this cycle of like creating something, keeping it for a while, and destroying it just happens over and over and over
Part
and
of
over
nature.
and over again. And so it's always one of those interesting components where people that talk about the Renaissance especially, and periods like that where there's just been explosions all over the world of creativity, is people tend to forget that it immediately was preceded by the Black Plague. It's like all of this destruction always precedes that moment when everything just blows up again.
Yeah.
And so, I'm an eternal optimist, and I just sit around and wait, because the world's not really falling apart right now any more than it has 100 other times in history. If you go back and read any moment during different periods from the Roman era, they're crazier than what's happening now.
Yeah, right.
And so that gives a great amount of perspective, because when everyone is screaming that the sky is falling, all you have to do is go back and read a little bit about histories of other times, and it's like, that was actually way worse than what's happening right now.
Yeah, we're not guillotines and chopping people up.
We're not even close to, a catastrophe like that level.
Kind of still in the preservation.
We're in that moment where everyone realizes that, in order for us to go into the next Renaissance, which will happen with technology, it's like we're just on that cusp of things like Tesla. It's like we're literally on the cusp of free resources, free energy, antigravitics, warp drive. All of this stuff is not that far away. But in order for us to enter into that phase, we really do have to kill off some pretty antiquated ideas.
Yeah.
And it's going to be super painful to kill off all of that stuff. But we have to in order to move into the next phase. And so as the art that I like to do, and what keeps me as an optimist, is just do art that does that promotes that. Promote the future idea. What is that going to look like? What are our future temples going to look like? What are the future buildings going to look like? Schools. Do we have to keep building strip shopping mall churches? Stuff like this. It's like, no, we can redesign all of this, because we have all these advances in materials and 3D printing and, all different types of ceramics and metal forming processes that we've never had before, that are now allowing us to do some pretty spectacular things. But the only thing holding us back from actually doing them is just the mindset that we can do these things. And I definitely think that we're heading there. Maybe it's 20 years, maybe it's 50 years, maybe it's 100 years, but we're on that path where we're starting to go back up. And, that's the other valuable thing about history, is these cycles take hundreds of years before they reach their peak again. So we may not see the peak creativity for another 100 years, but we're getting there.
It sounds like your work is definitely a part of that. And I can definitely see it talking to you and looking at the pieces that you create, because it is so the geometry of the things you work with, and how the spatial comprehension that you have. It's like being part of the creation of what's coming through next. And it's like you were saying, when you take a big piece of art and you break it down, and there's a bunch of little pieces of art, and it's like you're one of those pieces of art of the big piece. And depending on, regardless of where you are on the timeline of it, you're part of the ushering in of the next Renaissance coming through. I think that what you're saying is so unbelievably important, because most people don't know these things. They don't even comprehend. These things aren't in people's minds. That if you go and study inside of a building that was designed for optimum comprehension and curiosity,
You are going to be curious and inspired. If you're put into a school that looks like a prison cell, you're going to feel like a prisoner.
And not learn anything.
And it's, when we talk about it, it's one of those things like...
it seems obvious when you say it.
It seems obvious.
Like, it's so obvious.
And it's like, what are we doing? But maybe that's just part of the destructive process.
Yeah.
You know?
I'll give you an example of why I'm encouraged, though. So, when I say something like sacred geometry, a lot of people scoff because they don't understand what that is.
Right.
And that's really the best way to describe it, is that, you know, look at all these magnificent temples and cathedrals and buildings from these periods of time, and you realize that the architects and the designers of that type of art were using formulas that were very well established.
Right.
And now we call it sacred geometry. But at some point in time, all of that stuff, all of those guilds of craftsmen that knew that, it just went underground.
Yeah.
It didn't really die. It just sort of, it went underground because it went out of fashion.
Yeah.
And we've come through all these sort of, communist ideas of design and aesthetic, which is awful. And but in the background, underneath all of that, have been people that have been keeping all of that knowledge that the old architects and artists used to use. And it's interesting because I was asked to be part of a panel discussion at UT Dallas, the university, as part of an effort where they want to reintroduce sacred geometry back into the curriculum.
Wow.
At the university level.
Wow.
And as soon as that happened, and I went and I was part of these discussions at the university, and it dawned on me, like, this is starting to be taken seriously again.
Right.
They're not there yet because most of the people in the room didn't get it. They just did not get it.
But the seed
they didn't
was
get
planted,
what we
right?
were just talking about. That no, you can actually design buildings to enhance productivity, like all of this stuff. Healing. You can design a building that's just healing you from being in the building.
Yeah. Design the hospitals that way.
Why not? Like, why design a hospital like a prison?
Yeah, there's a lot of prisons out there.
And so it is encouraging to me that at the university level, this is starting to come back in.
Right.
Which tells me that, okay, if there are discussions like this happening now, but they're not ready to move forward on it, because how do you come up with a curriculum? Yeah. That was sort of the gist of the panel, is how do we come up with a curriculum on teaching these old principles to students that can't see it, and have short attention spans.
Oh yeah, right.
Because a lot of this stuff, these are meditations. A lot of this geometry, you just have to sit and think about for months before you can put them into a design. Yeah. So even the casual designer couldn't take a class and then just design something to achieve an effect. You'd have to have a whole degree program around teaching these concepts, and we're getting there.
They're talking about it.
And then the other example is, I was telling you earlier about biogeometry, and this Egyptian architect who's quite famous that came up with this system of biogeometry, which is exactly this thing, designing buildings and spaces and airplanes and cars and everything. You embed this geometry into the structures, and you're getting effects. You're getting healing effects. You're getting blocking electromagnetic pollution effects. All of this is possible just through design. This architect, they have university classes where they're teaching biogeometry in Europe.
I was going to say, where are they teaching it?
In Europe. And so that is happening. It's like, it is happening, which tells me that, okay, give it another 20 years and this will no longer be pseudoscience, it'll just be part of the design process. It'll be part of an architectural degree.
It'll be back into our lives again.
Yep. And as soon as that happens, then we're starting to see that, okay, now we're actually in that period of a new renaissance. Because if an entirely new generation or a few generations are raised of designers and architects and artists are raised knowing those principles,
Right.
then all of a sudden, as soon as they become of age,
They'll be building it.
they're building it. You're building
it.
So, I don't know if we'll see it in our lifetime, but I think it's just right there. It's really close.
Well, you're definitely a part of it. In my perspective, my view of it, you are here at the right time. You're here to at this ushering in phase, to include these things in your artwork, like you were saying at the Houston Museum. The drill design is the most popular place where people do their selfies they're just drawn to it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand it. All they know is, you know what, I need to go and stand over here and I'm taking my picture, and more people see it. It's getting into the minds of it's getting into people's visual minds.
Yep.
And I think that's, in my view, that is part of the shifting of the mind space. So, man, you're really doing great work.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you were born, and I'm glad that your life was guided in this way to usher humanity back into the next renaissance.
I hope so.
Absolutely, man. And thank you so
Yes.
much for letting me into your space. My mind is, I'm still trying to comprehend your mind because it's a very complex and vast space, very dimensional space, kind of a four-dimensional space as I'm looking at it, where inside of there's so many things and everything has a place and a purpose in its own. Mm-hmm. It's a cathedral type of mind, and it's been great to explore that with you.
Thank you.
So thanks so much for letting me in.
You're welcome.
You got it,
Let's
man.
go explore the rest of the house.
Yeah. How much